Welcome to the Divorce Remix Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to Divorce Remix, the podcast. I'm your host, April Nowlin. I am a divorce recovery and dating coach. And I say this all the time that divorce is a death, but it's not a death sentence. And so my goal with this podcast is to provide information, resources from experts and everyday people to help you guys to create a life you love after divorce. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that I feel like the topic itself is pretty common, but we don't talk about it enough. We're going to be talking about managing our relationship with high conflict exes. And so if that made you cringe, we definitely understand why. But we're going to be sharing with you some things that you can do if your relationship with your ex and co-parenting experience isn't the best. Some things that you can do to kind of help yourself out, help them out, hopefully, making sure your kids are okay. And so really excited about this topic. So I have one of my probably favorite people online on the show today. She is someone that I met a few years ago online, and I've just followed her, love her heart. We've had some conversations. We are in a similar space. And so I want to welcome to the podcast, Terrie Vanover.
Yay, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. Super excited.
Thanks for being here, Terrie. So I want you to share. So Terrie is a divorce strategist. And I know you guys know me as a divorce recovery coach. You may be like, April, that's kind of the same thing. Quite all right. So I'm going to have Terrie just kind of explain a little bit about what you do and how you help people.
So I think where, I've kind of niched in a little bit is really helping divorced people to heal their underlying abandonment wounds that tend to prevent them from having healthy relationships, healthy co-parenting relationships. And we're just not aware of how our co-parenting our abandonment wounds show up in our co-parenting, or how they show up even in our marriages. I wish I had known about this stuff prior to my own divorce, because I really feel like the trajectory of my own marriage would have been very different had I healed myself and worked on myself and done the inner work prior to my own divorce, because I think it would have made a big difference. But, it's all part of the journey, right? So for me, I really feel like if more people would work on themselves and do the inner work on themselves, they'd understand that the way they're showing up in all of their relationships will really shift.
Yeah. Oh, you hit the nail on the head there, Terrie.
Yeah.
Just thinking about abandonment issues, dealing with rejection, not feeling loved. And I tell the story all the time about my 3 failed marriages, and that was exactly it, right? Not being healed from those things and taking it from one relationship to the next. So spot on. So let's dig into this, right? So we hear this term high conflict ex kind of being thrown around, but what does that really look like?
Yeah, that's not the term being thrown around. So I'm glad you're not using, you know what we're talking about. That term, the N word, is being thrown around like spaghetti. It's like crazy. And it's like, so I feel like the divorce professionals are doing a huge disservice right now. I know I'm in the minority, and maybe you feel like maybe you disagree with me, and that's okay too. But I feel like there is a huge disservice being done right now in the divorce world, because we're propagating this agenda, increasing the conflict. I have been shocked at how many people are jumping on the bandwagon of labeling our exes with these like ridiculous
narcissists
terms that are just like, oh my gosh. And again, listen, I'm not denying that there are people that are high conflict. I'm not saying that. But when you label and you ascribe a label to someone, how do you think that person is going to show up with you? Like, that's the thing that I don't understand. Like, how would you like to be judged and labeled? I've seen, I don't know if you see this, there's this one particular person online right now in my feed on Facebook that is just spilling everything on Facebook. And I'm like, hey, this is a bad idea in so many ways. You're in the middle of a divorce. You should not be saying these things about your ex-husband and putting your personal business on Facebook anyway. But B, like, how do you think that that person feel? You know, that person is a person is going to be, you have to co-parent with this person. And when you show up and you've labeled this person already, and you're not willing to change your mind, or you're not willing to compromise, or you've labeled them and put them in this box. We all know that feeling. When someone has put you in that box, you become defensive, you become reactive. And so I think a big thing that I would just warn people of is just, hey, just be present in the moment, let go of the labels, and just, be there, right there in the moment with your ex. Let go of the past and be in the present. I think that's a huge shift. And I am not saying there aren't high conflict people, but you can add to that conflict with how you're showing up. So I think it's really important to say, what am I doing to add to this, to continue to further destroy this relationship?
Oh, that's so good. That goes back to really taking ownership and taking
Yes.
responsibility for our own actions, our own behaviors. Just because you are separated, divorced from this person does not mean that you don't have a responsibility to still, what I believe is, honor them, especially if you have children. And when I say honor, that doesn't mean you're a doormat. That doesn't mean that you don't stand up for yourself, right? But just like you said, it's taking ownership, taking responsibility for our own actions and our own the way behaviors and how we deal with this person. So for that person who is like, look, Terrie, I've been the nicest person ever, and my ex is just constantly, doing things that he knows, right, is going to either hurt me or try to hurt me. That situation is common, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so
Yes.
what do we do in that situation?
Well, I think you hit it on the head right away, which is like, take accountability for how you're showing up, right? And so taking a really good hard look at like what you're doing, and getting out of that victim mentality. But also the second thing is to really understand those triggers, and really understand what is it that this person is doing that's triggering me, and healing those underlying triggers. Because when you are showing up as the triggered person, you're showing up again, like I said, as that past version of yourself in the present moment. And we want to be present. We want to be clear. We want to be thinking from that clearest, highest version of ourselves at all times, especially when dealing with a high conflict person.
Mm-hmm.
And then thirdly is to look at those patterns. I've dealt with many, many clients, again, that have high conflict exes, but aren't, like, again, attached to those labels, are willing to look at themselves. And the third thing that we really do is look at the patterns. Because here's the thing, just because you divorced your ex doesn't mean you no longer have a relationship with them. In fact, that relationship is probably going to get worse, and the communication tends to get worse. So you still have to communicate with that person. So if you can look at those communication patterns, you're going to have to create new communication patterns. So we look at their patterns, and we look at how to break those patterns so they can create new ways of communicating. I'll give you an instance, an example with one of my clients. He came to me, and I would say, yes, she's pretty high conflict. I would agree with you. But again, I love that he was willing to, he's like, look, I got a co-parent. It didn't work out with us, but we got a son. I don't want to take that away from her, blah, 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 blah. He really had his son's heart in the forefront. And I think that's another key. Remember, it's about your kids, not about you. And so what we did was, like, understood that, like, their best way of communicating was written or text. And oftentimes he would kind of like plant a seed. She inevitably would blow up, to be honest with you. She'd just overreact, blow up. He didn't respond, right? And then come back a few days later after things had cooled off. And the way he would approach it is kind of like, okay, tippy toe back around it. And again, they would kind of, and once he realized he needed to stop reacting to that initial blow up and just let it die down and come back in a different approach or tiptoe around it a day later. They were able to continue their relationship and continue the communication. Now it's different for every client, every relationship is different. But that's just one example of how, like, when he realized he needed to bow out of that initial, whatever that reaction she had, he needed to take himself out of that. And his trigger was his son, because it was his heart. And if she kind of brought that into that, that inevitably would get him riled up. Yeah. But when he realized, okay, I need to step back and not react to that and just cool off. And he worked on himself and worked on his own self-worth so that whatever she said, it no longer bothered him anymore. Again, he could just kind of like plant the seed, walk away, and then they come back. And here they are years later. He's got a great relationship with a new person. She's moved on. They live on the same block together and co-parent. So it is more possible, even with high conflict people. So that would really be the message I'd want to say, is like, if you get out of your own victim mentality and you really say, where is my power? And you really step up, you really can change the dynamic. I see it over and over and over again. If you are willing to change yourself, a lot of people just are not willing. They're still wanting to blame the ex.
Yeah, that is so good. Taking that ownership, because, when you go through a divorce, it's so easy to to have a victim mentality, right? This happened to me. This person did this to me. And so we have to shift our thinking around being a victim to being like a warrior, right? Like, we survived this. And so I want to talk a little bit about boundaries, because it sounds like one of the things that you encourage your client to do is to set some healthy boundaries. And I've heard it said like this: you have to treat people how to treat you. Right.
Yeah.
And especially if you're coming out of a divorce where you were mean and negative and, and that's the only way you knew to communicate, then setting those boundaries. So what are some of the things that you would recommend people do to set healthy boundaries with their ex?
Well, the first thing, it's healing those abandonment wounds, because I think where people get boundaries wrong, the biggest myth is that you set the boundaries, but really you don't do that first. You work on your self-worth first so that you can follow through on the boundaries. Because people think like, oh, I'm going to set the boundaries. But especially if you've had a pattern of letting people walk all over you, and that's how you've gained your validation, is through external sources, you have to really do the inner work and do the self-worth work on yourself so that you know that you're worthy of those boundaries, because that's what most people don't really get the connection there. And boundaries are not about other people. They're about how you show up in the relationship. I will no longer, I will end this phone call if you continue to use names. It's not about telling other people what to do. It's about, taking ownership again of your own behavior. I will no longer tolerate this. Yeah. So I think that's the other second biggest myth, is that boundaries is not for others. It's to set the parameters on your own behavior. And that's why I say, like, people, unless you've done the self-worth work on yourself to understand, I matter, my needs matter, my feelings matter, I don't have to put up with this anymore. And only then can you then follow through on those boundaries. So you got to do that's what that client before. We did a lot of that inner work on himself so that he could put up those boundaries with his ex-wife. And I see it over and over and over again. And communicating with I messages. That's, again, because it's about us. It's about telling. And that's another thing. The more you tell people what they will do, the more resistant they become, the more rebellious, the more like, you're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to continue to yell at you. It's like, I won't, continue on this phone call if you continue to raise your voice or whatever. Versus don't yell at me or don't talk to me that way. It's a big energetic difference for sure. Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love how you said that really boundaries are for us, right? And it is acknowledging what we will and will not do if this person continues to act this way, right? And so a
Yes.
lot of times when we see our clients that are not upholding their boundaries, it's exactly like you said. It's because they haven't done the inner work enough to be able to uphold them, right? And their
Right.
ex is going to know, okay, she says that or he says that, but doesn't really mean it because every time I call them a name or every time I use this phrase, they respond the same way. And so if we start responding differently, it is
Mhm.
inherently going to have them to shift their behavior because, like you said, it's setting that boundary for us first and then
Right.
letting them follow. So that's great advice.
And I think it's important to get help and support from people like you and I to hold people accountable, because if it's truly like a high conflict ex, oftentimes when you do set those parameters, you are going to get pushback.
Yeah.
And so your tendency will be to backslide. So it's important to have, like, that's why it's good to have a divorce coach in your corner to hold you accountable and to help you see. For me, it's like seeing things from the future. You want to hold yourself from the future, your future self, versus like the right here and right now. So you have to think from like it's a whole different mindset. And like, yes, they're pushing back now, but you hold on to those boundaries because eventually it'll set into place. And it does take some time to, right? When you're turning that ship 10 degrees, it
Mhm.
takes time for it to set a whole new course. So I think
Yeah.
it's important to understand, like, it's, you got to get that support. This is not easy.
It's not. It's not. A term that I've used before is that a cruise ship doesn't turn on a dime, right? And so
Hmm.
we think about changing our mentality, changing our behaviors, especially if you've been in a marriage for a long time, because this is the way the person has been communicating with you for probably years. And so
Yes.
we think that we're divorced, all of a sudden we're totally different people, they're totally different people. And as we know, that's not the case, right? So as
Mm-mm.
we are changing, then we are doing things intentionally to let them know that I'm different now and you're going to have to treat me different. So I want to talk about the effects on the kids, right? So we know that when we have two co-parents that don't get along, that don't communicate, then really it's the children that are being effective. And so, what are some of the things that we can do? And I don't want to say to shield our children from it, but to help them through that transition.
There's lots of things, and I think it's number one, it begins with you as the parent. Like, you have to really focus on you being healthy and happy. And if they have a healthy, happy place to land and they feel safe and secure and they know they're safe and secure, that's like really number one. Because if you're a hot mess, your kids are going to be a hot mess. You know what I mean? If they can't rely on you, if they can't come to you, if you're not a safe place that they can express themselves, it's detrimental. So the best thing you can do is give your kids a healthy, happy parent. Like, that is the best thing, because you're modeling for them how to be. You're modeling how to be resilient, how to be, at peace no matter what's
Mhm.
going on around them, that their safety, their security, because that's the number one thing, is like, in this turbulent times, they need that soft, safe place to be. And we also allowing our kids to express themselves, and whatever feelings they have, it's okay. I think sometimes we expect little children like not to have big feelings, but they have big feelings too. And they might be happy there's a divorce. I think people are surprised at, like, or they're not really that affected by it. And then, we're creating this drama. So I think it's just a matter of allowing them to feel whatever they feel. But again, I cannot stress this enough, that I don't think people understand. They think, well, I don't talk about my ex in front of my kids. Like, they don't know. And I'm like, they know. They know. Can I share like a personal story?
Absolutely.
So I know this, it's a little bit about high conflict, but this was kind of really more, it's a little bit about betrayal trauma. And this wasn't my ex-husband, but it was a family member. So this is a really good example of how our kids pick up everything, right? And I am a healing coach. And even I had struggled with this family member who had betrayed, like, like legit, like betrayal trauma, took money, like it was bad, a family member. And I mean, I was really angry for a hot minute, it was rough. But, again, I did do all the inner work, do all the inner healing. But at the time that this had occurred, I was still kind of in the throes of like being pretty angry about it. And I remember we were in the kitchen. I'll never forget this, not ever. And I was in the kitchen at the sink, and one of the kids behind me had mentioned that family member's name. And like my kids all just kind of like stopped and were like, oh, what's mom's reaction going to be? And I was like, see, like, again, not that I've ever mentioned it or that they knew, they know when we're carrying around that toxicity.
Yeah.
And for me, this was like the aha moment that kids pick up everything, whether you think they do. I don't talk about their father in front of them. Like, no, but they know you're carrying around that anger and that seething rage,
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, all right. So what again, I went to my own tools and I did some forgiveness work around this whole bit and all this stuff. So it's all good now, but I'm telling you, our kids, they know and they pick up on this stuff. But so if this is this detrimental with a family member, I can't even imagine if this was their father, that. And when we are holding on to that anger and that resentment and all that stuff, we're not only pushing that person away from us, we're pushing our loved ones, our kids away. Because that was the biggest motivator for me, was like, oh my gosh, like by holding on to this, my kids are like, energetically like away from me, because they know they can't really talk about it. They can't be themselves around me. And I don't want that. I do not want that. I want my kids to be themselves, be open, be loving, love who they want to love. Who am I to keep them from that?
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard it said this way. Sometimes you just have to have a great poker face, right? When your kids are sharing things, if it's about the other parent, and inside you're like, I know, like I can't stand it either, but you just have to have that
Right.
face, like, okay, honey, all right, like it's okay, it'll be okay. One of the things that I think with children too, we have a huge opportunity when we are going through our own healing to show them what healing looks like. So I know with me growing up in the era that I grew up, and I know we're not too far in age, people didn't really talk about these things, right? So divorces
Mm-hmm.
happened, life happened, trauma happened. You didn't talk about it. And so I
Mm-hmm.
remember when I went through my divorce in 2019, my daughter was 10, and we had conversations about, me being sad, or, different feelings that I was feeling. And not that I was putting my emotions on her, but I didn't want to just sweep it under the rug. And it's like, okay, like
Yeah.
we've got this family, one day all of a sudden that's gone, and we're just never going to talk about what happened. And so to your point, I think that sometimes we underestimate our children and their resiliency, and giving them the ability to heal with us, because they are also going through some trauma, right? It's not just us.
Yes.
And so I think,
Yeah, yeah. So again, that's again why we have to work on ourselves and heal ourselves, so that we can hold that space for our children and allow them to heal and allow them to express their grief and allow them to express whatever. I mean, my kids talk about when their dad and I are together, and we're both remarried. We are both remarried. But I mean, we have such a great co-parenting relationship. Like, my ex will joke about me because he knows me so well. He jokes, he makes fun of me all the time. And that's like totally cool. You know what I mean? It's like, because we have that kind of relationship, and our kids are like totally cool to talk about that and to talk about when mom and dad were together. No one feels awkward because we're both remarried. It really is amazing. I do like kind of step back and go, it is really amazing that we've created this amazing dynamic, that we can all four parents lovingly love each other, accept each other, embrace each other, and our kids can all accept and embrace each other. Because that's another thing I think a lot of co-parenting is recognizing that your ex will move on and will have another partner. And so many people struggle with that. It's not so much the ex, it's like when they get a new partner, that the real insecurities are like, no one's going to replace me as their mom and da 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 da. And like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, I don't even remotely feel that way about, I love my kid's stepmom. Thank God. Thank God. I just love it. Like, I just love it. And I see so many women that just really struggle with that.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some of the things that you guys did to form what you have now? Me and my ex-husband, like you, have a really great relationship. But what are some of the things that you and your ex did to kind of form, like this bond that you guys have, where your children can, for lack of better words, be free to love, all the parents in their life. So, what are some of the like practical things that you guys did?
Practical, okay? Like, we do what's best for the kids. I think a lot of co-parents get uh they use the term my time, his time. It ain't your time, it's your kid's time. And I would love to shift that, because when there's scheduling conflicts or schedule, it's not about it's my day or it's my ex's day, it's the kid's day and it's what's best for them. We recently had a lot of like turmoil in January and February. And I guess I just forget how like easy it is. It's just like, oh, this is what's best for the kids because, my ex has to work at 3 a.m. They can't spend the night at his house. So they're going to come over here and like we just work it out because it's not about us and it's not about time. I think people get so wrapped up in that, like, custodial time or the parenting time. It's like, dude, it's their time and it's about what's best for them. And it all works out in the end. It really does.
Yeah, that's
Putting the kids first.
that is spot on, right? Is that if we think about what our children need first, and even thinking about if you've got a situation where you and your ex don't get along, and I'm not talking about something that is harmful or unsafe or a violent environment. So let me say that.
Yes. Yeah, let's
But
clarify that.
as long as those things aren't in place, like you said, there shouldn't be this, it's my time or it's his time or her time. It's really about what your children need. And one of the
Yeah.
things, so when my daughter and my daughter's dad and I first split, and we started this, probably she's about 6 months old, we would do the 1 week on, 1 week off. And people would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're letting your kid go, for a week. And I'm thinking, well, she's not going to a psychopath's house. She's not going to a stranger's house. It's her dad. He is just as much of her parent as I am. And so thinking about it in the way of your children still need both parents, right? And so I feel like unless there is a reason for it to be such a big split, then it's really about what the kids need and being flexible. So you made the comment of, if your ex has to work at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? So you could just as easily say, no, it's your time, you keep the kids, but all that's doing is hurting your children. And so I think also being flexible enough. And at the end of the day, being co-parenting, it just ain't easy, people. So, it's not always going to be this, okay, Monday at 2 and Friday at 1. Like life just doesn't happen like that. And so I also think that along with the things that you said, is just being flexible and
Yes,
just
definitely flexible.
just being flexible with yourself. And so I think that's a huge, huge point. One other thing that I want to tap into, Terrie, while I have you, is what are some, just, we talked a little bit about, and you mentioned your client communication. And so what are some of the things that you can share with us just to help with, some communication techniques that we may have to use if it's not the traditional, I can call you for anything. What are some of the things that you advise your clients on if maybe that relationship isn't great right now?
Yeah, and I just want to add one other thing. I think that probably you and I have automatically done this, but a conscious thing that people need to be aware of is like, don't let your ego get in the way. Always assume the best of your ex. I think sometimes our egos want to jump on a mistake or want to jump on, say, see, I'm the better parent and da 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 da, or see, I knew he couldn't hack it. I mean, I think a lot of us And that's again something you got to do the inner work on. But I think one of the things that has made it a successful co-parenting relationship, especially with kids, right? And I was a teacher for 21 years, so I know this. Like, just because a child says it doesn't mean it's a reality. It's like their perception. So
Mhm.
I always want to tell people, like, assume the best of your, co-parent, or that they're doing the best that they can, even if they make a mistake, because we all make mistakes. I think that's really key. And you asked me what.
Yes, I was talking about some communication techniques because I feel like that's where like a big breakdown is, right? When you feel like I
Yeah.
can't communicate with this person.
Well, and I think that is it, because people assume the worst. Oh, well, my child said you did this, and they don't have the full story, or they don't have the whole context. And it's like, oh, that's not really what happened. Um, but also I do think, like, it is important, like with that client I was telling you about earlier, was texting. They did need to keep it very kind of formal, and the best thing for them was to keep it in a written context. They didn't, and I do think for some people, and sometimes it's not like you're not going to be kumbaya, like my ex and I having parties together and giving birthday presents and Valentine Day. It's not all like that. I get that. I get that. Sometimes the best you can hope for is just respectful co-exchanges together. You could do, the Family Wizard app, so that you keep it in that texting, and there's, a record of it. I just think it's really important to, again, think about the patterns, because those negative patterns you had in the marriage are going to be even amplified once you're going through that divorce and post-divorce. Divorce brings out the worst in people.
Mhm.
And co-parenting is hard. Give yourself some grace. Give your ex some grace. It's not easy. I think that's the other thing too. And also, I don't think there's a lot of support. I think the thing is, 30% of families are blended families, and we don't talk about it. There isn't a lot of support. There isn't a lot of education out there about it. So you're really, there's more of us than we think they are. We're just not talking about it. So a lot of grace, a lot of grace to yourself, a lot of grace to your partner. Figure out, how do we best communicate? What are our patterns when it's been effective? What's going on that things are going well? I think those are just some, like,
Love it.
logistical things to look at.
Love it. Well, Terrie, as always, I have loved talking to you today. If someone is interested in getting in contact with you, they're like, hey, I love this lady. I want to chat with her, possibly work with her. How can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely, April. Thanks. You can find me at choosingtorise.com. That's my website where, you can get a free resource to help you with that co-parenting. I'm happy to give that to you, choosingtorise.com. I have a Facebook support group for men and for women. It's called Thriving After Divorce. So if you're looking for that, like, more community, that's a great place to find us too. Women Thriving After Divorce, Men Thriving After Divorce on Facebook. That's another great way to find me.
Awesome. Thank you, Terrie, again for being my guest today. I have just really enjoyed our conversation and the nuggets that you shared. And my hope is that after listening to this, that there are going to be people that are going to go, okay, you know what? I'm going to do some inner work. I'm going to work on my boundaries. I'm going to work on my communication. I'm going to work on, things with my children, and that they actually have some takeaways. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you, thank you, thank you for listening to the Divorce Remix podcast. And if you are a regular, welcome back. I love, love, love that you guys support the things that I am doing. So until next time, you guys have a wonderful life after divorce.